And 3, 2, 1.
Good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight. Tonight we're going to go over the 3 plans or options we have for returning back to school this fall. So let me move on to the next slide. Here's our agenda for tonight. We are going to give you an overview and then talk about the key dates coming up. I'll give you the definition of the 3 different scenarios or 3 different options that we are looking at. Go in a little more detail on those 3 different scenarios. We'll talk about some of the common questions that we've been receiving here in the last day or so. We'll talk a bit about next steps, and then we will open it up for questions. So if you have a question, you can submit that question in the chat. And when we get through all of the presentations of the slides, then we will come back and start responding to those questions. So a little bit about an overview. This has probably been the most complex and challenging project that we as a district had to have taken on. Something that I think we as a community is experiencing the pandemic and taking on things that we've never imagined that we would have to do. But we are doing that, and I want to thank the individuals that have been on the task force. We have a little over 160 individuals that have been working on these 3 different scenarios and options that we will go over through tonight. And I also want to thank those individuals that are watching and those who have already provided feedback and asked questions, because that is information that we will take back to the task force as we review the 3 different options and make any type of adjustments that we need to make based on the feedback that we receive. We think it's important that we engage with our community and students and families and staff. It's very important in education, and we think it's important that we have that feedback and input as we come up with these 3 different plans and implement the plans during this pandemic. We all remember that we start responding to this pandemic challenge March 15th. We've received assistance from Minnesota Department of Education, Minnesota Department of Health, have charged districts to develop 3 plans or 3 scenarios. That information was given to us on June 18th. The task force was formed. As I said, we had 160 plus individuals working on that task force. Those individuals from district staff to teachers, paraprofessionals, operational side, parents, students, and we've also were fortunate to have representation from Mayo Clinic and Olmsted County Public Health part of that task force. The recommendations we will discuss tonight, we must be flexible, and what I've been saying to individuals is that we have 3 plans, even though we'll find out next week which plan we will start the school year out, but we've also been told that we may have to switch from one model to the next during the school year. We may start out the year distance learning, and if our cases start going down here in the state of Minnesota, then we may be able to shift, for example, to hybrid, or the other. If we start out in hybrid and our cases continue to increase, then we may be told to switch to a distance learning. And we've also been told by the Department of Education that when you make that switch, it might not be just the district. We may have a specific building because of positive cases in that area that just that school would have to switch from what the rest of the district is doing. So we have to be really flexible and be able to make that switch from different options throughout the school year. Expert advice, we've relied on these guiding principles as we try to reduce the risk of transmitting the virus, maintaining a distance of at least 6 feet between individuals under normal circumstances. Additional space may be required at different times. For example, when students are exercising or playing wind instruments or singing or shouting. Face coverings, both cloth and disposable, can reduce the spread. So we've kept that in mind as we are working on these 3 different options. And effective hand washing and use of sanitizers can reduce the virus on hands. Specific cleaning techniques and products can remove the virus from surfaces, and consultation of symptoms. So these are the kind of the guiding principles we use as we were working through the 3 different options. Talk a bit about student and family needs. The committee considered feedback from parents and guardians, MDE statewide surveys. We did a thought exchange locally here to get feedback from parents to determine what were the best practices that they experienced with their child last spring when we finished the year in distance learning. We did surveys with students and families. We did surveys families experiencing homelessness and other insecure housing situations. So all of this different feedback and information that we've obtained was looked at by the members of the task force. Task force membership to address students and family needs. We had equity specialists, nurses, social workers, school counselors, Olmsted County Health, and Housing and Human Services were part of that group. When we look at staff needs, all staff surveyed we surveyed all staff members to assess what was important to making a positive decision to returning to work. And these are the common themes that we heard from that feedback, is that they wanted us to follow the CDC guidelines for social distancing, masking, hand hygiene, screening, exclusions, and other protective measures. We also heard from staff that they wanted to restrict the number of people in the buildings and classrooms at any given time, increase our cleaning procedures throughout the district facilities, plan for various situations when staff members are exposed or ill, frequent and clear communication with staff and families, and hold all students, parents, and staff accountable for doing their part to minimize the risk of all involved. And those were the common themes that we heard from the staff survey that we did. One of the things that we also have to keep in consideration is the finance and the feasibility of the funding that we have. We understand that the economic impact of the pandemic has had a huge impact, not only on the state level, but at the federal level, and that does impact our state and federal funding that we receive. We recognize that any funding increases that occur because of the pandemic is something that we'll have to keep in mind as we move forward in developing future budgets. And without additional funding, we're going to be forced to make difficult decisions in the horizon of maybe eliminating other district investments to make up for the cost of the pandemic. We have 3 shared beliefs that we kept in mind as we were working on these 3 different scenarios: equity and access. We wanted to keep in mind our graduate profile that we created a couple years ago in partnership with our stakeholders, and also wanted to focus on the physical and mental wellness of our staff and students. Key dates to keep in mind. This week, we're giving families and students an opportunity to give us feedback. Tonight's another example of that opportunity to give us input and feedback. The week of July 27th is when the governor will be announcing which scenario that we will be starting the fall. This slide is actually even out of date. Even just today, we heard that the governor will make that announcement on July 30th. So up until today, we've been hearing the week of July 27th, but today on a call with the Minnesota Department of Education, superintendents heard that that announcement will be coming on July 30th. August 4th, the school board will receive the final recommendations from the task force. That will be presented at the school board meeting at 5:30 p.m. It'll be streamed live on our YouTube channel, and you can see the channel, the information you need to access that board meeting. On August 5th, the district will follow the guidance of MDH and MDE and implement the scenario that we're told to implement. And the district plan will be published on our website. So let's talk about the 3 different scenarios or 3 different options that the task force worked on. The first one is in-person learning for all students, very similar to what we were doing before the pandemic. The only difference is that we are going to create as much space between students and teachers as feasible during the day. but we will not be held to strict 6-foot social distancing during the primary instructional time for that first scenario. Now, when we look at the hybrid model, this is hybrid learning with strict social distancing and capacity limits. With this model, we cannot have over 50% of the capacity of that particular building, including both the students and staff in the building. And then we also have to maintain that strict social distancing in the building as well, and as far as transportation as well. Then the third model is distance learning. This is exactly what we finished the school year with, so all of you are pretty familiar with that. And this may be implemented, like I said earlier, it could be local, regionally, or statewide. And then as we progress through the pandemic, it could be even a particular school may be told that they need to go to distance learning while the rest of the schools may be on a different model. So what to expect? So let's talk a little about the area of safety in all three scenarios. The district in each building has a designated COVID-19 program coordinator. We will update our crisis plans as far as fire, lockdown, and tornado drills, which follows fire marshal and CDC guidelines. We'll do additional hand washing time or provide additional hand washing time for students. Hand sanitizer dispensers will be available in the classrooms. Student lessons will be given on hand washing, hygiene, proper mask wearing, and other preventive measures. And then we will follow the American Society of Heating, Refrigerating, Air Conditioning, Engineering guidelines for air quality. Distance learning will be available to students who may be medically vulnerable or unwilling to return in person or hybrid. So if we are told to go to all students or in school or the hybrid model, there still is the option for a student to choose the distance learning option. Let's talk a bit about mask, but this is for scenario 1 and 2, which scenario 1 is all students are back and scenario 2 is the hybrid model. All individuals, staff, and students and 2 years of age and older are required to wear a mask at all times in the school, including playgrounds and on our transportation. We do, right here, we do talk about 2-year age. We did give guidance, heard guidance today that 5 years and older, we are still having a conversation on what our expectations will be for preschool age. So, but right now, definitely 5 years and older will be required to wear a mask, and we'll come out with some communication later about what we will be expecting of our preschool age students. Exceptions to mask use will be determined on an individual basis. Masks may be removed for eating or drinking once students are seated. And indoor-outdoor PE, masks will not be required as long as social distancing is maintained, which is 6 feet in most situations. And then when their cardio activity is occurring, social distancing must increase to 12 feet. As far as cleaning, I want to talk a little about the cleaning that we'll be doing for both the scenario 1 and scenario 2. Frequent cleaning of high-touch areas. We're talking like desks, door handles, keyboards. Plus, we will also do frequent cleaning of restrooms, buses and vans, and our playground areas. We will use EPA regarding safe and effective chemicals. And as far as returning library books and lost and found items, they will be isolated in an area not accessible to students for a quarantine period. As far as transportation for both the scenario 1 and scenario 2, eligible families will be using district transportation are required to register to ride the school bus. And I really want to talk a little bit about this. It's extremely important that families do complete this, because as we look at trying to adjust our transportation for the number of students that can be on a bus, it will be really important that we know what students are going to be on the buses every day. So we are going to ask our families to fill out that register to ride the school bus, and that will be extremely helpful as we start looking at how many students we can put on each of our buses. And I do want to talk a little bit about that. Up until yesterday afternoon, the guidance that we were receiving was that we had to 50% capacity on buses unless we couldn't maintain 6-foot social distancing. So that's why you saw in one of the scenarios that students would only be coming to school 1 day out of 4 days, or 1 day out of the week, and then the other 4 days they would do distance learning. But the guidance that we received yesterday afternoon was they are not going to require us to maintain that 6-foot social distancing on the buses, but we're only able to have a bus at 50% capacity. So we will have to readjust that, and it may look like in that hybrid model, a student may be able to physically come to their school more than 1 day out of a week, but we're in the process of looking at routing and seeing what that would look like. But that was just new guidance that we received yesterday. When possible, we will create as much space between riders, recognizing that it is not feasible to have 6-foot social distancing. And then planning continues regarding transportation for after-school activities, and this information will be shared when that is available. Let's talk a bit about arriving and leaving school for both scenario 1 and scenario 2. MDH screening tools will be used at home prior to arrival. And really it's just a list of symptoms that we are going to ask parents to check to make sure that their students do not have one of those symptoms. So that's something that we are asking parents to do every day before they send their child to school. And then we had COVID-19 family and student agreement, and I want to be clear that it's just basically a document that parents are going to be asked to sign saying, I agree to use the screening tool at home with my children before I send them to school every day. We will have specific entrances and exit procedures in place, and may look differently at each building depending on the building. So they will have clearly marked entrances and exit procedures in place. And then we will have signage throughout the building directing traffic flow and social distancing requirements. In the hybrid model, this will also apply that campuses will be closed except for students that need to leave for CTAC, incubator EDU, or any other post-secondary or personal appointment that they may have. But other than that, during the hybrid model, we will have a closed campus. We talk a bit about shared items in the schools for both scenario 1 and 2. Shared items such as PE equipment, library books, and other learning materials will be sanitized in between use or quarantined for 24 to 78 hours, depending on what type of equipment it is. Hand washing will be required before and after use of shared equipment. Where possible, lockers will not be shared among students. Where possible, buildings will assign lockers according to attendance days. If, for example, if we're in the hybrid model, we will try to assign according to different cohorts to maintain space between our students. As far as hallways and passing time, we are going to limit the number of students attending school each day and staggering passing times. We'll stagger dismissals from classrooms and cafeteria, etc. Restrooms will limit the number of students utilizing restrooms at one time, and congregating at lockers will be discouraged in the hallways. It's something that we deal with a lot at the secondary level. Let's talk a bit about the mental health and emotional wellness. In all 3 scenarios, counselors and social workers and other mental health providers will provide support. We do have a published hotline phone number for each school that right now can be found on our COVID-19 section of our website. So there's specific hotlines that we have set up for each school for that mental health and emotional support that's needed. And we'll also create a web page to better educate our students and families about the mental health support that is available at each of our buildings. Communication with families about the availability of services and resources. We're going to put that information out in multiple languages and using multiple formats. For example, Skyward, Sky Alert, Google, social media, and in print. Our counselors and social workers also plan to hold forums and topic sessions on mental health and emotional wellness for families. So they will have sessions on those different topics. In the area of social emotional learning and relationships, In all three scenarios, students will be able to connect socially with one another. Instruction around time management, organization, mindset, self-regulation, and self-advocacy. We'll have social workers and counselors will continue to partner with teachers to continue providing our second step curriculum. Advisory homerooms and classroom teachers will develop an initial relationship with students and families to provide a sense of belonging and support. And that list below are just some of the examples that teachers will use to do that work. Next, let's talk about learning during in-person scenario. Learning will be in person following the school district calendar. Distance learning will be available to students who may be medically vulnerable or unwilling to return in person or in a hybrid learning. So I want to make it really clear that if parents are not comfortable sending their child to school in person, we will provide a distance learning option for that student. Continuing on learning for scenario 2, which is the hybrid, and scenario 3, which is the distance learning model. Students will receive instruction in person 1 day a week and through distance learning 4 days a week. And that's kind of what I mentioned earlier. That's going to change with the new guidance we received yesterday that we can put more students on our buses. So we'll provide some update once we figure out the routing and what that would look like. And I anticipate it'll be more than 1 day and potentially could be maybe 2 days a week that they can come in person. Teachers will provide daily direct instruction, including a possible mix of live learning and recorded lessons. In the elementary schools, this will include language arts, mathematics, social studies, science, and special areas. Staff will address instructional needs of students with IEPs, 504s, and health plans on an individual basis. Specialists in reading, math, English learning, gifted and talented education, and other areas will support students in their in-person and distance learning. And student support will also be provided through the work of paraprofessionals, equity specialists, resilience specialists, and others. Also learning for scenario 2 and 3, teachers will post weekly schedules on Friday or Monday. And this is something that was really consistent when we received our feedback from parents on our distance learning. They said it really would be helpful if teachers would post weekly schedules. So our plan is for both the hybrid model and distance learning that teachers will post their schedule either Friday or Monday for each week in the Google Classroom. Staff will focus on building positive relationships with students and families. Teachers will embed social emotional learning into their lessons. The student behavior handbook applies to all students during distance learning and in-person learning, on transportation and during other district activities. The district would develop grading guidelines to be shared prior to the start of the school year. Field trips will not happen until further notice for both the hybrid and distance learning. The district would develop a plan for offering instruction in special areas such as art, music, media, physical education, and secondary electives, and we'll get that information once that work has been completed. The district will provide professional development for all teachers on effective online learning, restorative justice, instruction for equity, including but not limited to white fragility, micro-messaging, implicit bias, systematic racism throughout the school year. Let's talk about our meal service. In the in-person scenario, tables and chairs will be cleaned in between use. The self-serve items will be minimized and try to use as little as possible. And then the hybrid model, seating and lunch lines will follow social distancing guidelines. We'll implement a non-contact payment process. Grab and go meals will be provided on distance learning days. We will continue to work with families on documented special dietary needs, and meals will be fee-based unless students qualify for free and reduced meals. If the USDA waives this requirement, as it did for the spring and currently during the summer, we will adjust our process. Talk about meals for distance learning only. We will still provide grab-and-go meals on the distance learning days. We'll continue to work with families on documenting special dietary needs. Meals will be fee-based unless the student qualifies for free meals. And then, like I said on the previous slide, that if we get a waiver, then we can go back to what we did for the spring and summer and not charge students. We will implement a no contact payment process for the distance learning as well. Talk a little bit about technology in all three scenarios. Families will be asked to complete a needs assessment to discover their device and connectivity needs. And it's going to be extremely important that families really complete this needs assessment, and this will be coming out in the future. And what we're going to ask is we need to know, does your student need a device, and do you have Wi-Fi access? And that will help us determine how we need to check out devices and work with families to get them connected to the Wi-Fi. And it'll be extremely helpful that people fill out this assessment, because that'll be data that we really need to have. Communication to families will still be delivered through the SkyAlert Messaging Center, email, phone, or text messaging, and Skyward. For more information on SkyAlert and Skyward, visit our families page online. Devices, including keyboards, printers, and other high-touch surfaces, will be cleaned in between users. In the hybrid and distance learning scenario, schools will prioritize device distribution, and we have iPads and Chromebooks based on the family's needs, including one-to-one sites. Resources and training will be made available to families to make them familiar with the technology that their students will be using. And all grade levels and schools will be using Google Education and for the learning and management. And this is another clear message that we heard from our parents in the surveys, that it was extremely difficult if I had a child that was in multiple levels, and each student was required to use a different learning management system. So we have decided to use the Google Education for our management system. Just quickly about attendance, we will be taking daily attendance, and we will, as we get closer to the start of school, we will communicate and let students know how we will be taking attendance at different sites. In scenario 1 and 2, families will be notified by Olmsted County Public Health of a confirmed case in a close contact with their child. And I think that was some of the, well, I'll talk more about that when we get to the frequently asked questions. Nurses at each site will provide daily student health needs. And we're going to make a little bit change in our visitors. In all three scenarios, we are going to restrict non-essential visitors and volunteers. And parents will be asked to make appointments for in-person meetings or to participate in meetings online. So we're really going to try to restrict the number of individuals that are coming and going into our buildings to keep our students and staff safe. Talk a bit about our special facilities for both scenario 1 and 2. Our school pools will not be used during the school day. Locker rooms are not used during the school day. Playgrounds will be disinfected before school each day and open for recess on a limited basis. Outdoor fields will be used as much as possible for physical education and recess. In distance learning, special facilities will be closed with the exception of playgrounds and outdoor fields, though they will not be disinfected. Let's talk a bit about school-age childcare in scenario 1. We will provide before and after school SAC will be offered at each elementary school. It will be fees based, and we may have a capacity may be limited by staffing and facilities availability. For scenario 2, we'll still provide before and after school SAC will be offered on in-person learning days. It will be fee based. School day care will be available for children in Tier 1 critical workers on distance learning days, and that will also be fee based. Capacity may be limited by staffing and facility available. For scenario 3, which is distance learning, we'll provide school day care will be available for children of Tier 1 critical workers. That will be fee-based, and capacity may limit the number depending on our staffing and facility availability. And we're going to get into some of the questions that we've been receiving already, and there's been a lot of questions about notification of COVID cases. And I want people to understand that we work very closely with Olmsted County Public Health, and they pretty much direct the process, and we work with them on communication, very similar to what we do when we have other health issues in our schools. We work with them and they determine, do we need to communicate this out and to who we need to communicate it to? So we will continue to work with them on that. If a classroom or school is quarantined, would impact instructional staff be forced to use sick time? And that my answer is it depends on a number of variables. And for instance, a teacher not experiencing symptoms may be assigned to a distance learning. So it's going to be a case by case. So we'll have to work with that individual, and HR will have to work out with that individual. We've been asked, why can't we test every staff member, every student every day? We just do not have the capacity. There's in our community to test over 18,000 students and over 1,500 employees every day. That's just something that our community doesn't have the resources to do that. And why aren't we checking temperatures at schools? And unfortunately, we would just not have the capacity at our sites to test every student that comes in, because they all will be coming in pretty much all at the same time. So we're not going to be able to do that. So this is why we're asking parents at home to use look at the symptoms that a student possibly may have at home, and if a child would have one of those symptoms, we ask them to keep them home. All right, let's talk a little bit about next steps, and the task force will review all our family feedback that we are collecting through a SurveyMonkey and what we're collecting tonight. So next week, the task force will look at that information. We will bring this feedback to a public school board meeting on August 4th. We will also be reviewing staff feedback at the beginning of August and incorporating that feedback into our delivery model. So there's a link there to provide your feedback. You can use this link and that will take you right to that survey if you have not had a chance to complete that survey yet. So at this time, we will answer questions until 6:30 p.m. and all questions received will be reviewed and addressed within our plan. So if we don't have enough time tonight to answer all your questions, that information will be given to the task force so they know that is something that our stakeholders are concerned about or have questions about. So at this time, we will open it up to questions. Okay, just a little bit of clarity here. There, some of the questions, Cabinet has already been responding to your questions, so I am just going to respond to the published ones that have not been responded by Cabinet members yet. So let me get to that section. So the first one is, how will you enforce the student handbook guidelines if we go distance learning, and how will cyberbullying, abusive language, and use of technology be addressed? And I guess to respond to that, I would say our expectation is that our students follow the behaviors that are in the handbook, and we will address them just like we would if we were in person. If, for example, if a student reports that cyberbullying is happening, that will be communicated to the building administration, and they will deal with it just as if the student was physically in the building. So we will continue to implement our handbook and address things as they happen. And then as far as misuse of technology, we would handle that exactly the same. I can tell you we did have one misuse of technology this past spring when we were in distance learning, and we handled it very exactly the same way we would if we would be in person and a student misused district technology. The next question is, will students and parents get any training or guidance on using Google Classroom? Yes, and that's one of the things I mentioned, that we do plan to provide some training for parents, so they are familiar with the Google Classroom that we will be using, and so we do plan to provide that training for parents. Okay, a vocal group of parents state that they will not make their kids wear masks. What will happen when a student refuses to mask, and what is the discipline? Well, we actually had, this was a conversation that we had today on our call with the Minnesota Department of Education, and we do plan to enforce that. And right now we have not determined the exact consequences for not wearing that mask. But our goal is to really expect students to wear masks unless they have a medical reason that they're not able to wear that mask. Can more detail be provided on there not being enough transportation for 2 days per week? If bus capacity is 50%, but only 20% of the students will attend each day, I don't understand how. Yeah, let me explain that. And before we received the new guidance yesterday, we were told that you can have 50% capacity on a bus. So if we have a 70 passenger bus, we can have 35 students on the bus. But they also said that you have to, having that 50%, you still have to be able to keep students 6 feet away. So when we were working, the task force was working on this, the only way we could put students on the bus and keep 6 foot social distancing, we were putting about 13 students on a bus. So with only being able to have 13 students on a bus, that's why we said a student would only be able to physically come to school 1 day out of the week. But now with the new guidance yesterday, that we can put 50% of passengers on the bus and not be held to the strict 6 foot social distancing. We do have to be able to keep the 6 foot distance between the driver and the student. So our team will have to go back and do some rerouting and see what it would look like now that we can put that 35 students on that 70 passenger bus. And that's why I said earlier that I think we can now potentially get students in the hybrid model, maybe 2 times out of the week they could be there physically. So we do have to do some work on that, but that was new guidance that we received yesterday afternoon. Next question says, it was mentioned that we would be notified by Olmsted County Health of a positive case that impacts our child. We had an exposure through daycare and it took a few days to hear from Olmsted County. Would we know sooner? Would the class be immediately notified by the school and then the classroom closed for 2 weeks? No, we, as I said earlier, we take the directions from Olmsted Public Health, and we would not, we may not even be notified that the student was positive until Olmsted County reached out to us. So we pretty much take the directive from them, and we'll do notification based on what they tell us. And they will do all the contact tracing and all of that work. That's something that we do not do. And because of data privacy, we're not able to share that information. But I know it could be frustrating for parents, but that's the process that we do have to follow. The next question, if a student is required to quarantine due to an exposure at school, will they be able to participate in distance learning during the time frame? Yes. If for some reason a student, let's say we are in all in person or in a hybrid model, and a student does need to quarantine, then that student would go to everyday distance learning during that quarantine time. Let's see, was 1 week in person, 1 week off distance learning considered? If so, what was the determining factor against the options? I think, I know the group did have some conversation about that, but they felt it was important that a student at least be able to be in person at least 1 day out of the week versus every other week. So, but I know that is something that was considered by that group working on that. Next question, if in DL or distance learning, will teachers need to find daycare during the school day's hours? This was a significant problem in spring, but understandable at that time. At this time, we have not been told specifically from the Minnesota Department of Education on who is going to be in that tiered 1 essential workers. I think if I remember correctly, last year in the spring, when they first came out, they were not in the tier 1, but eventually teachers did come into tier 2. And I think, so right now we think they are, unless that changes. But I do want to caution that we also have to consider number of staff that we can provide and the space that we have. So we may not be able to have the capacity to provide that for every teacher, especially, for example, if we are in the hybrid model, we're going to have students in all of our schools. And then as we bring in daycare students, we have to be careful that that doesn't push us over the 50% capacity of that building. So it's really going to depend on what model we're in and the space that we have available at the different sites. So that, I guess that's how I would respond to that one. Will the scenario that is selected in August be for the entire school year, providing we don't go back to lockdown? The guidance that we've received from the Minnesota Department of Education is that we have to be able to jump from one model to the next. And we were told that we can not have students come to school for 1 day to transition into that new model. And I think that's why I think it's, even though it's a lot of work to create 3 different plans, I think it's important that we do have all 3 in place, because we may have to shift from hybrid to distance learning in the middle of the year. And as I said earlier, that even a specific building may be expected to shift from one model to the next. And really it's really going to come down to the cases that we have in our county or in our area. And, you know, if we can get those cases to continue to drop, the better chances we have of getting our students in buildings and keeping them in buildings. But we do have to build the transition from one model to the next during the school year. Next question is the district planning for budgetary increases for more custodians and cleaning staff. We do anticipate this is an area where we are going to see an increase in our cost. So that's something that we are aware of, and we do have some CARES funding that was allocated to our district, and we have not made a final decision on how we are going to use that funding. And what we've been waiting for is try to determine what model we're going to be in, because we know some models are going to be, we're going to see some increased costs. So we're fortunate that we do have some federal money that can help us in this area. Let's see, can we make changes to our busing survey? I'm assuming they're asking the one you filled out about your writers. Okay, so we do have in the chat, there's a phone number, so you can contact transportation if you do need to make a change to what you might have filled out in the survey. Will masking be required on buses, and will there be extra supervision other than the driver? Yes, masking will be required on the buses. We do not plan to provide extra supervision on the buses. We do have some that some buses do have paras on there, but we do not plan to put additional supervision on our buses. But we do. The expectation is that students do wear their mask. The next question. Is this meeting recorded and available to watch later? And Heather did put a response there in the chat. Yes, the video and presentation will be available on the district website tomorrow. Next question, is there a requirement for the amount of learning versus we do not have specific amount yet. That is something that group is working on, but that is guidance that we will be given our teachers in the future and getting some feedback from them, but there will be some expectations on the amount of learning that must be available to students. Will families need to provide documentation that their students can't wear a mask for medical reasons? Yes. That is something that we are going to require. I can tell you that I have had some communication with Mayo Clinic and made them aware that we will be expecting medical documentation, and they anticipated that, and but that is something that we are going to require. They aren't going to be able to just come in and say, I have a medical reason I can't wear one. We're going to be asking for documentation to support that. If Rochester Public Schools goes to just one day on a site, does that mean private schools have to also, unless they pay for their own buses? Private schools do not have to follow the same restrictions that we follow. However, we do provide transportation for our private schools, and we are not required to provide any more transportation for their students than we provide ours. So, if they do want to do something different than what our students are doing, then that's a cost that they will have to take on. And yes, you're correct, they would have to contract with First Students to schedule that additional transportation and the cost for that. Okay, high school students do not travel together during the day, and how will you do scheduling for high school students and maintaining 50% in the classroom? And that I'll be honest with you, that's one of the bigger concerns I have is as we are scheduling our students, and it's much easier in an elementary level where you have the same group of students with the same teacher all day. But that is our plan is to do the scheduling that. For example, if I have a biology class of 28 students, I may be able to only have 24 of those on a given day. So it is going to be a challenge, but our plan is to work out scheduling so we can maintain that 50% in the classroom. Would you offer some information on what 504 and IEP services during distance learning would look like, and will we have the staff to provide all of those services? And I do see there's a response to that question in the chat already. And it depends really on individual student plans as well as the model that we're in. And yes, we do have staff available to provide these services. Do you anticipate a higher or lower need for substitute teachers, and can we or will substitutes play a role in distance learning technology? I guess I really don't know. We did, we're in the process of surveying our staff and asking them, would you return to work if we have whatever model it is? So we're still collecting that data, but I anticipate we probably are going to need substitute teachers throughout the year, no matter what model we're in. So that's something that I know we did use a few substitutes teachers this past school year when we were in distance learning. So yes, I do see that we will have a need for them. I don't really know if it'll be higher or lower, but I do know we will need them. If we opt out of our kids riding the bus to school at the beginning of the year, will that stand for the whole year, or would there be options to change after the first semester? Right now, we're holding to what you sign up for. We do know sometimes, however, there are circumstances that change in your family situation, and we may have to allow you to change. But right now, we really need solid numbers to really help us determine our routing and our capacity on our buses. But I would say we would do it very rarely, but we do know there may be a situation that we may have to make adjustments for. Could one building be on distance learning while another be in hybrid? Yes, that's what we've been told by MDE, that not only may the whole district need to transition from one model to the next, but even a specific building may have to go to a different model than what the rest of the district is doing. Will teachers be given extra prep time to prepare lessons for in-person and distance learning in the hybrid model? or will they be expected to teach the same number of classes? Yes, you'll be expected to teach the same number of classes, but right now I do know the option that the committee is looking at is that 4 days out of the week, you would have students in person, or a certain percentage of your students in person. And then that Friday, for example, all students would be distance learning. So you would have some time, we believe, on that Friday for planning, because we don't anticipate that teachers would be doing distance learning the entire 7.5 hours of the day. So they would have some time each week for that planning. Will teachers be using webcams with students? I assume they'll use some type, because I talked earlier about we'll do some recorded lessons, so we will have to do that. But yeah, we will be using some webcams during some of that learning. What if a family sends a student with symptoms? What accountability will there be for these sorts of situations? One of the requirements that we're asked to have at each site is if a student reports to school and has one of those symptoms, we have to have an isolation location in the school for that student until they can be picked up by their guardian. So as far as accountability, I don't know if they're asking for consequences for doing that. That's not really something that we've talked about, but we do, like I said, each building will have a location where students can be isolated if they do show up to have one of those symptoms before they can be picked up by their guardian. How will teachers teach students in the classroom at the same time as at home? And I think that's something that we are working with. I think we had over 30 teachers on the task force, so I know it's something that they are working on, and I have seen some of the work that they've done, and they do have some ideas in that area for that. Will outdoor spaces be utilized and encouraged to assist with social distancing? And yeah, as we said during the slides, for like PE, we are going to encourage them to use, at least when the weather's nice, to go out and use outdoor spaces as much as possible. But as far as maybe some of the other content areas, that's not something that we're expecting them to do, but that would not prohibit them from doing. Let's see, if the school went to distance learning will Zoom classrooms be considered? No. The common theme we heard from our parent surveys that we need to have all students using the same system, and that's why we've chosen Google as that. We will not be using Zoom. We just do not feel Zoom is a really safe system for us to use. But the group that's working on that did recommend Google as that platform. Approximately how many kids will an elementary teacher have per day? Well, no more, if we are in the hybrid model, no more than half of your students couldn't be in your classroom on a given day. So it just depends where we're at. Okay, we're down to 2 minutes here, so let me look through a couple more questions. Since Longfellow has already started the hybrid model next week, do they have a district person dedicated to ensure the safety and supports needed? As the plan says, each building will have a hybrid in the hybrid model. I do know right now there are several district staff that are working very closely with Longfellow, and we will assist them until they are able to identify that individual that will be their contact person. Let's see, if a staff's family member is exposed and needing quarantine, will the staff member have to quarantine as well? That will be determined by the Olmsted Public Health. That's not a decision that we will make. As Olmsted County works with those families, they will determine if they need to go into quarantine. So that's something that will be decided by the Public Health Department. I think looks like we have time for one more question. Concerning the lack of plans to take temps check symptoms upon arrival, was consideration given to staggered schedules or part-day schedule to allow enough staffing to do this. I do think that group did briefly talk about that, but when you go to staggered schedules, that means more additional routes to bring students to school, and that is not a cost that the district can take on, additional routes to get students to our sites. So we're at 6:30, so I would like to personally thank all those individuals who joined us tonight. As we stated earlier, tomorrow we will have a recording of this on our district website. And if you have not already had an opportunity to fill out that survey, I encourage you to do that, because we really need to hear from our stakeholders as we take that feedback and make adjustments to our 3 draft plans that we have. So again, thank you for joining us tonight, and we look forward to hearing your feedback. So thank you.